Mas quem é que deixou a telefonia ligada tão alto? Não há aqui nenhuma telefonia ligada. Sim, não ouves? Que curioso. É a música do meu sonho. Não, está tudo em silêncio absoluto aqui no lar. Não pode ser. Eu estou a ouvir perfeitamente. É música tradicional da Irlanda. O doutor diz que não são os ouvidos. Já me estou a habituar. Já começa a ser mais fácil conversar no intervalo das canções. Há 3 noites que não dormes. Vê se consegues desligar essa música e descansar. Espera. Estou a lembrar-me do quê? Da minha mãe? Estou a ver a cara dela. Que bonita. Estou a lembrar-me dos seus abraços e a música. Era esta música que ela me cantava. A sério? Desde que ficaste órfão aos 5 anos, que isso tinha apagado a tua memória. Eu não me conseguia lembrar de nada da minha infância. Foi como se a música que não me sai da cabeça tivesse aberto a porta para as minhas memórias perdidas. Bendito AVC. O doutor disse que pode acontecer. Um pequeno acidente cerebral despertou a música e as memórias apagadas pela morte dos pais. Estou feliz, finalmente reencontro o meu passado que eu julgava perdido. Até já tenho pena que o volume da música tenha diminuído.
In August of 1994, I was at a family reunion. I had asked my brother-in-law to do the barbecue for a while because I was going to go call my mom. And I had not been paying attention to the fact that a storm had come up over the lake. And as I went to hang up the phone, I pulled it away from my face and I heard a loud crack. And at the same time, I saw a big flash of light come out of the phone and hit me in the face. I knew that I'd been struck by lightning.
You know, Tony is an interesting case, and I've spoken to him, and I was colleagues with Oliver Sacks, his doctor, and frankly, it's a mystery.
2 weeks after that, I started to have this insatiable desire to hear classical piano music, and I thought, this is pretty strange. I was a kid of the 60s, had rock and roll, and there wasn't much else. So I bought the CD, and I listened to it on the way home, and then I listened to it every day. I made everybody else listen to it, and I'm sure that they were sick of it, but I was absolutely possessed by it. And I realized that it's not going to be enough for me to listen to this music. I want to be able to play it. After about 3 weeks of this, I had a dream. As I'm walking out onto the stage, I see myself playing at a concert hall. And as I'm walking along, I'm listening to the music and I'm saying, this is not somebody else's music that I'm playing, it's mine. From that moment on, whenever I would sit down at the piano to start doing my lessons, the music would start to play in my head. If I didn't pay attention to it, it would become more insistent and would start to play in my head when I was trying to work or when I was trying to do other things. And I sat down and I spent the next 7 months every night working on the music. And from that point on, you know, it's been music that I've played in a number of different venues. Well, I just retired from doctor at the end of 2018. And so now I would like my second life to be music. And I belong to another group of selected individuals called the idiot savants, or rather sudden savants is actually the category.
Em 7 mil milhões de humanos, pouco mais de uma centena está identificada com uma espécie de superpoderes, os savants. São pessoas que desenvolveram ou nasceram com capacidades especiais
que lhes permitem memorizar datas, números ou factos de forma extraordinária. Outros compõem música e criam obras de arte, de modo repentino ou inesperado.
Savants have the ability to take a helicopter ride over London Harbor, over New York Harbor, and then on a huge canvas, create an image, a realistic image of the panorama of the entire harbor. This is incredible. The human mind has the capability of memorizing millions, billions of tiny little facts and able to regurgitate it.
There are many kinds of savants, and we know little about the underlying brain processes that enable that. Let me just give you some obvious examples. Calendar calculation. I had a young man who came to my laboratory from India. His parents brought him over for us to study. He could tell me the day of the week for any date in history. It took him about 2 seconds for each one. So now this was a young man who was so incapacitated that he had to be driven to school. He couldn't cross the street by himself. He couldn't take a bus or a train. And he was totally dependent on other people, but he had this remarkable ability. Jill Price is special because she has the ability to remember where she was and what she was doing and what happened nationally and internationally for almost any day of her life since she was about 12 or 13 years of age. We call this highly superior autobiographical memory because she can remember the days of her life the way that you and I can remember yesterday. She can remember decades ago.
I added up all the days from 1980 until today, and it's 14,245 days that I can, tell you every day. That's a lot of days.
So she might remember what she had for lunch on January 3rd, 2013. She might remember that, but she would also remember that over the radio or on TV that day, some important event occurred, like a plane crash or an automobile accident or an international event of some kind. And those are part of her autobiographical experiences. In testing one day, I asked her if she knew what happened to Bing Crosby, the famous American singer. And she said, oh, yes, he died on a golf course in Spain, and she told me the date. And I said, well, how did you know that? She said, my mother was driving me to a soccer game, and the news came on over the radio. And here this 13-year-old girl at the time remembered something which was not important to her at all. It was just part of her experiences, and it became part of her autobiographical memory.
That's the thing, which is the crazy thing. Like, you would think that I would have been an A student, but it doesn't work that way. That's why, like, when I was, studying with my mom back in 1978, it was torture. It really was. It wasn't like I could read a book. It's not photographic. It's not like I can read a book and remember, what I saw. I'm not really very good at memorizing. It's just my life, what was going on in it, what was happening in the world. It's just stuff that I have seen myself with my own eyes and experienced emotionally. This makes my emotions extremely high, like high intensity.
We have seen some of our subjects who have highly superior autobiographical memory who have a lot of emotional problems. And their claim is that they have these problems because they can remember all of the bad things that happened to them.
My husband passed away in 2005. And that's 14 years ago. It might as well have been last week. So, there are things that I just will never be able to get over and move forward from. The things that are, like, tragic in my life are still right there, as if it was yesterday.
If your memory is too good, you lock yourself up in jail because you never forget anything. You can't undo things and say, okay, it wasn't that bad and I can do something else. And so the past becomes very traumatic if you remember every single thing. So in that sense, we need a good balance of memory. We've got to remember, but not necessarily every single thing that good and bad that has happened.
That is an argument that psychologists and neuroscientists have had for decades. We need to forget in order to remember the important things and not remember everything.
You know, everyone has baggage. And apparently I've got over 14,000 bags that I'm carrying every single day. I feel like my memory has ruled my life. If I didn't have a memory like this, my life would have been completely different, I truly believe.
Well, we have been studying this kind of memory for 18 years now, and we found that we were only able to identify, say, a maximum of about 70 people in the United States. We have looked at the brains of individuals who have this ability, and we found a small number of regions in the brains that differ in terms of anatomy. And we've identified some regions of the brain which get activated more intensely. So we have both anatomical and brain physiological evidence that tell us that their brains differ slightly but significantly from the brains of those of us who don't have the ability.
Apesar de haver mais de uma década de estudos sobre os savants, está ainda por confirmar a origem destas capacidades especiais. Existem várias teorias. A chave para uma memória excepcional pode estar afinal na incapacidade de esquecer, ou pode ter origem numa lesão cerebral.
Quando um dos hemisférios fica danificado, o outro é obrigado a desenvolver capacidades extra para compensar o mal sofrido, ocorrendo por vezes uma explosão de novas aptidões.
One of the things that Oliver said to me, he thought that the lightning had opened up some parts of the brain to me that I was not scheduled to have access to in this lifetime.
Is it possible, for example, that a damage to a region of the brain would remove restrictions on other parts of the brain so that they can behave differently? Now, is this a process, for example, that underlies these extraordinary abilities? Is it that something about one region of the brain is not working well, and another region all of a sudden can work extremely well? And the reason that it can't do it now is because everything is in competition. It's been an area of research that has been under-investigated. There are a lot of secrets there that are very, very important to understand.
Bom dia, Johnny. Bem-vindo.
Bom dia, doutor.
Então, conte-me lá. Como é que foi a sua infância?
Eu e o meu irmão vivíamos numa casa junto ao mar. E foram bons momentos. Fomos muito felizes.
Ainda se dão bem?
Sim, mas vendo-nos pouco. Ele começou a trabalhar e vai casar em breve.
Diga-me lá o que é que tem feito.
O que é que eu tenho feito? Inscrevi-me na Marinha há poucos meses e sinto que nasci para isso.
Sabe em que ano é que estamos, Johnny?
Em que ano é que estamos? Mas que raio de pergunta, doutor? Estamos em 1945?
Que idade é que tem, Johnny?
Que idade é que eu tenho? Tenho 20 anos? Oh, meu Deus! O que é que está a acontecer? Eu tenho 20 anos? O que é que me está a acontecer?
Johnny é um homem inteligente com raciocínio rápido e espírito lógico, mas para ele não existe a anterior, apenas um buraco negro. Não se lembra do que acabou de fazer ou de onde acabou de chegar. Lembra-se muito bem do passado, mas não tem memórias do presente.
That's what takes all of our experiences that we have, glues them together to give us a sense of continuity in our life. And with that information, then, we can predict the future. And that's the virtue of having memory ability, is that we can make adjustments in our lives to change our behavior in terms of the experiences that we have. Think about it for a moment. If we didn't have memory, we wouldn't be able to walk, we wouldn't be able to talk, we would be like a vegetable. Somebody would have to feed us, although there would be no one around to feed us because they wouldn't have memory either. So memory is just clearly the most important capacity that we have.
Só é possível fazermos projeções contínuas do futuro porque temos memórias do passado. Sabe-se que quanto mais emotiva for a experiência, mais fácil é guardá-la no arquivo do cérebro. Mas a memória não é uma reprodução exata do que aconteceu. A ciência tem demonstrado que quando vamos ao arquivo,
das nossas experiências, aquilo que trazemos de volta podem ser memórias alteradas ou mesmo falsas memórias. Nos Estados Unidos, existem 300 casos identificados de pessoas presas injustamente, vítimas das falsas memórias de terceiros.
We certainly rely on memory for all the things we do every day. But as the science shows, memory can be flawed. And we can forget things that we've experienced, and we can also create false memories for things that never happened. And when that happens, it can really affect justice, and it can lead to a lot of tragedy. And often I apply my work, my scientific work on memory, to legal cases. So I look at cases where people have been accused of things that they didn't do, or even convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. One of the worst cases that I ever saw was a case of a man whose name is Steve Titus.
Eu era, na altura, gerente de restaurante bem-sucedido. Ia casar daí a 3 meses.
He was, so happy in life.
Uma noite, quando fui a uma estação de serviço com a minha noiva, fui mandado parar pela polícia e fui interrogado como se fosse criminoso.
Because there'd been a rape of a woman that occurred in the area where he was seen, and he kind of fit the description.
Fui injustamente acusado de violar uma rapariga de 17 anos. Fiquei em choque.
And when his photograph was shown to the rape victim, she said, well, this one looks the closest. But by the time she got to trial, she became absolutely positive that it was Titus who raped her.
Sempre defendi que estava inocente, mas não valeu de nada. Fui condenado.
He was convicted, and it was a huge tragedy for him. His relationship with his fiancée broke up. He was sent off to jail, and it was later discovered by a journalist that another person had committed that rape, committed many more rapes in the area, and eventually Titus was freed.
Tinha reconquistado a liberdade, mas tinha perdido tudo o resto. A noiva, o bom nome, o emprego, o dinheiro. Decidi avançar com processo contra os que destruíram a minha vida.
And as that civil lawsuit was about to go to trial, Steve Titus woke up one morning and he keeled over. He had a heart attack at the age of 35 from all of this stress.
No matter how certain you are, your brain is still just guessing, and you can be wrong. And sometimes those mistakes have catastrophic consequences for people's lives. This would lead to discussions about how to make judicial systems fairer, how to make sure that the people who have committed a crime actually get arrested and have to pay for that crime, and also, conversely, make sure that people are not falsely imprisoned or falsely put to death.
Memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing. Well, when I was thinking about the connection between memory and freedom, and the idea that what they have in common is a sort of fragility, I was thinking about the fact that memory can be manipulated, and memory can be changed. I know a lot about how false memories get created, because in my scientific work, I deliberately distort people's memories for events. We can make people believe that a car went through a stop sign instead of a yield sign, or through a green light instead of a red light. or that a perpetrator, had curly hair instead of straight hair, all by asking suggestive or leading questions or by exposing people to misinformation. And many people will kind of unconsciously pick up that misinformation, incorporate it into their memory, and it causes an alteration or contamination in memory. I think we all need to have a kind of healthy skepticism about memory.
Uma pequena transformação anatómica terá sido decisiva há cerca de 60 mil anos, quando a conjugação entre laringe-língua e os músculos associados permitiram o controle e a articulação de sons, abrindo as portas para o desenvolvimento da fala. Um pequeno passo que levou à escalada da grande empreitada humana.
Desde há milhares de anos, aqueles que tiveram maior capacidade para a linguagem foram os que melhor sobreviveram e se reproduziram. A linguagem surge como a realização suprema da evolução humana.
The agricultural revolution was an incredible, remarkable change that allowed us to communicate in ways that we couldn't even conceive, before then, right? Before the agricultural revolution, we communicated with 1,000 people, the most, right? After the agricultural revolution that allowed, us to sustain large cities, now we start, communicating with tens of thousands, hundreds of millions of people, really, after we invented written language and other means of communication that are not limited by personal human contact. So I think our ability, to communicate really is the key thing that has been enhanced.
E a escrita aparece no Mediterrâneo há 7.000 anos, mais ou menos, com a escrita cuneiforme e que começou-se a trabalhar a escrita. E depois, há 3.500 anos, aparece escrita também na América Central. Porquê que o cérebro dos habitantes da América Central também chegaram à escrita? Portanto, dá a ideia que o próprio desenvolvimento do cérebro chegou a determinadas funções quase naturalmente, que tinham que aparecer.
Há a possibilidade de nascermos com uma programação genética que poderá justificar o aparecimento da escrita, da agricultura ou da arte em diferentes continentes, sem contacto entre si. Será também esse um dos motivos que justifica a natural apetência das crianças para aprender idiomas. Atualmente existem cerca de 6.500 línguas, das quais 2.000 estão em perigo de extinção. Algumas são faladas por pouco mais de uma dezena de pessoas.
O crescimento do número de palavras tem sido exponencial a cada 3 séculos. Como é que, por exemplo, no caso do alfabeto latino, com apenas 26 letras e 10 algarismos, o cérebro constrói as mais belas obras de arte, as mais complexas invenções ou as mais simples mensagens. Um número finito de símbolos para uma infinidade de conjugações e possibilidades. Aí reside o poder da criatividade humana.
Metaphor sounds like it's a decorative element in language, but it isn't. It's a fundamental way in which we understand things, is by comparing something with something else. So metaphor is not superficial or added onto language. It is at the root of language.
Se não existissem pairando acima de nós todas as representações simbólicas que a arte, a música, a religião, a filosofia e a história inventaram, que tipo de pessoas seríamos?
A tecnologia seria paleolítica e a arte ainda consistiria em figuras rústicas e bonecos desenhados em paredes de rocha. A ciência e a tecnologia consistiriam em afiar pontas de lança, talhar machados de pedra e talvez perfurar carapaças de búzios para enfiar nos colares.
Acredita-se que há cerca de 40 mil anos, uma poderosa conjugação entre fala e arte terá dado um impulso determinante para o grande salto da cultura humana, contribuindo para moldar o cérebro e o curso da civilização.
Desde cedo, os humanos terão começado a extrair melodias e ritmos de objetos que os rodeavam. Não há registro de nenhuma cultura no passado ou no presente que não tenha utilizado ou criado música, No entanto, a dúvida persiste. Música ou linguagem? Qual surgiu primeiro?
We don't really know which came first, music or language. There's no experiment yet that we've figured out how to do that will tell us. But there's tantalizing evidence that music might have been first. One piece of evidence is that in the neuroimaging studies I've done, brain scans, the areas of the brain that are activated by music but not by language are older, phylogenetically older brain structures.
Well, music, it has the most extraordinary power. We don't for an instant understand how or why, but it has, I think, far greater power than speech. But in common with a number of anthropologists, I suggest that the most likely thing is that language emerged from music, not that music emerged from language.
I think that music has been successful throughout humankind because it solved some problem, some adaptive problem. Important things that we now would write down and codify, our ancestors couldn't write down. And the available evidence from hunter-gatherer societies is that they embed this kind of information in song. Stories like don't go to the well on that side of the mountain because somebody's grandfather went there once and the neighboring tribe killed him. Or how do you boil these plants so that they won't be poisonous? And so we see that one of the evolutionary purposes of music, and there are probably several, is that it's a good way to embed information in a signal that's memorizable. But drumming is probably what the first music was. When we say we've discovered bone flutes that are, say, 40 to 60,000 years old, it seems logical that before our ancient ancestors went to the trouble of boring holes at precise spacings in pieces of bone, for tens of thousands of years before that, they would have been drumming, hitting tree stumps and stretching animal skins over hollowed out pieces of wood. And of course, any contemporary music would be unthinkable without some kind of rhythm. One of the distinguishing features of music as we know it for the last 500 years is that it has a pulse. It has this rhythm, and if it's not kept by drums or drummers, it's implied in the minds of the musicians who were playing.
Cérebro, corpo e sistema nervoso são estimulados e transformados a partir da repetição rítmica de sons. O ritmo excita os corpos, a melodia excita o cérebro. A junção entre ritmo e melodia liga o cérebro primitivo, onde se dá o controle motor, ao cérebro mais evoluído, o córtex cerebral. É por isto que o rock, o metal e o hip-hop são os géneros musicais mais populares do mundo. Na maior parte das línguas, existe uma só palavra para música e dança. Há evidências de que o ser humano é a única espécie capaz de sincronizar os movimentos em grupo com a música, um aspecto fulcral para a vida em grupo ao longo da história da civilização humana.
I think what it suggests is that group movement, such as dancing together, marching together in a formation, are things that help to promote social cohesion within the species. So our laboratories show that people who listen to music, even without moving, have synchronized brainwaves, and the movement gives you all the more of a connection to other people. I've often thought that before world leaders sit down to negotiate some sort of a treaty or agreement, they should dance together. They should listen to music together because it'll cause their brainwaves to synchronize and maybe reach an agreement more easily.
Além da dimensão social, a música tem também uma conotação sexual, funcionando como instrumento de sedução.
Será esta uma realidade tão fútil quanto aparenta? Ou terá, afinal, uma justificação mais profunda e com impacto na história da reprodução humana?
When you look at the animal kingdom, which animals have music? Well, crickets and birds, of course. But why? The birds with the clearest sound, with the most complex melodies, also had the most girlfriends. In other words, it's a mating call. Music is complex because birds want to attract other female birds, which are sensitive to the sophistication of the melodies. The more complex the melodies, the more girlfriends these birds had. And you can see that with humans too.
We don't really know why music has the power of seduction to seduce mates. In the animal kingdom, the analog to this honest signal hypothesis is the peacock's tail. In other words, the peacock's tail, just picture all of the vibrant colors. What that indicates is that the peacock has access to a really good source of nourishment, including nitrogen-rich foods. What he's signaling to the peahen is, I'm fit, I've got good resources, you should choose me because I'll share those resources with you. What the singer or a musician is saying to a mate is, I don't have any neurological disorders, I can play this instrument or I can sing. And in the kinds of singing that happened in evolutionary timescales where you would sing and dance for hours on end, and moreover, what you're signaling is, I have so many resources that I don't have to waste my time working for them. I can frivolously spend it learning this skill that has no apparent use.
Entre todas as formas de arte, a música é provavelmente a que maior poder exerce sobre as emoções, conduzindo à alegria ou à tristeza numa fração de segundos. Que poder tem a música que as palavras não têm?
Language is very good for describing very distinctive emotions that are separate from each other. Music excels at being able to deliver a jumble of emotions, which really is a lot more like life is. Life rarely brings us a single emotion at a time. If you've got children and they go off to college and they move out, you're not just feeling one emotion. You're happy, you're sad, you're apprehensive.
We say we have to play the music. We are playing music. That means we have to perform, we have to play it each time again. And this each time again is exactly responsible for the different moods. We are playing a game. Playing music is related to play, like children play, and the element of play, of playing, is related to chance. You can lose or you can win. So we are never dealing with something which is already completed. The composer delivers a score, but the score as such is not the music yet. Something else has to happen, and this something else is related to doing. The musician is the doer. It is he who does something in order to change a situation which is responsible for the changing moods.
Music is an extraordinary thing because it illuminates meaning. We think that meaning is in words, but there is often more meaning in music than there ever could be in words. And yet, where does it come from? Well, I can tell you, after performing years of electron microscopy, I can confirm that music is composed of notes. And what does a note mean? Let's drill down to what it's made of, and then we'll understand what music is. So let's take a note and really focus on it. What does it mean? Absolutely nothing at all. Well, let's try adding another note that means nothing at all. Still means nothing. And yet, if you keep on adding these notes, you can have something so profound that it can be one of the most important experiences of your life to listen to it, which is what I call betweenness. And what it means is not the space between things, but what happens when several things come together. And it includes the things that come together and their relationship. Rather like, where does electricity exist in a circuit? Does it exist in the positive pole or the negative pole? Well, not really just one or either of them. But it also doesn't exist in both of them. It exists in the space between them. But that's not right as well. It's the betweenness of the whole thing, the two poles and the connection between them. Now, music is like that. In that sense, it's like people. I could say my wife means everything to me. And a visitor from Mars or a very clever computer would say, okay, what does she mean? I say, I can't tell you what she means. She just means everything.
There's no single music center in the brain. It seems as though music activates more regions of the brain than anything else we've seen. Music activates every region of the brain that we've so far mapped, and it unites the primitive reptilian portions of the brain with the higher cognitive centers in the prefrontal cortex. One of the ways that it does that is that it acts as a synchronizer for our movements. It's very easy to move along with music because our neurons fire in synchrony with the pulse of the music. Music activates regions of the brain that are ancient, phylogenetically old parts of the brain that we have in common with other mammals. And one of the things that happens is music activates the brain's reward center, the same pleasure center that activates when we eat chocolate, if we're a gambler winning a bet, or when we take drugs of addiction, when we have sex. Music activates the nucleus accumbens, which modulates levels of dopamine in the brain, and that gives us the feeling of reward and pleasure, along with endogenous opioids in the brain, internal opioids that are generated when we hear music that we like. It's a sex, drugs, and rock and roll center of the brain.
Como é que a música influencia o desenvolvimento do cérebro e que impacto pode ter no comportamento e no desempenho cognitivo? O Brain and Creativity Institute foi à procura de respostas num estudo realizado com a IOLA, Orquestra Juvenil de Los Angeles.
Our partnership with BCI, the Brain and Creativity Institute, was really about a partnership with Antonio Damasio. He and the BCI approached the LA Phil and said, would you all be interested in a study that looks at the effects that your YOLA program has on the lives of these kids? Which was really interesting for us. YOLA is a program with music at its center. And these kids come together 48 weeks out of the 52 weeks a year. They practice together as a group after school for 12 to 18 hours a week. This is an extraordinarily intensive program for kids who come from really challenging neighborhoods around the city of Los Angeles.
Nós queríamos saber se havia algum efeito positivo que se pudesse medir em relação ao uso da música extremamente cedo no curso da educação. Primeiro, haverá qualquer coisa que a música faça que permita um desenvolvimento cerebral maior? A resposta aí é extremamente clara. Há regiões do cérebro, regiões que têm a ver com o sistema auditivo, que de facto se desenvolvem mais rapidamente quando há uma educação musical. Porque este efeito musical, da educação musical, tem boas repercussões quando se pensa no resto dos estudos que a criança está a fazer. E aí a resposta também é sim. Portanto, não é uma perda de tempo, não é um exercício que não vale a pena, pelo contrário, é um exercício que dá a impressão que complementa o resto da educação que a criança está a ter.
And I was really excited because after the first study, the first 5-year longitudinal study, which started in 2012, we were able to point to the positive effects that our YOLA training had on kids' brains, the development of their brains, physiologically, the change in their brains because of this deeply intensive work on music.
E depois há outro resultado que parece muito notável. Se a criança tem à sua frente a possibilidade de ter uma recompensa, como por exemplo repousados, se aquilo que nós pedimos à criança é que não avance imediatamente para os ditos repousados e se diga, olha, se conseguir esperar uns tantos minutos, em vez de ter um repousado vai ter 2. E aquilo que se encontra é que nas crianças que têm estudos musicais mais avançados, essa capacidade de inibir e a busca da recompensa e de esperar um pouco mais de calma o momento de ir à recompensa é muito maior. O que isto nos diz é que a música pode contribuir para uma maturação mais rápida desse sentido de controle sobre as nossas ações.
Now, that said, there's some preliminary evidence that children who learn a musical instrument have fewer behavioral problems than those who don't.
Nós estamos a passar por um momento social em que cada vez há mais música na educação. Em sociedades avançadas isso está a acontecer extraordinariamente. A minha previsão é que daqui a 100 anos vamos encontrar uma profusão de pessoas que utilizam música, que executam música e compõem música.
I tell people who have children that they want to help engage with music that it's never too early to start. They should be playing music for their kids even when they're in the womb and in the first months and years of life. And they should be playing a variety of music from all over the world, music of all different styles, because the infant brain is wiring itself up to the structure and rules of these different musical systems. And although the older child may end up not liking all these different musics, you're at least giving the child a basis on which to judge. It'd be like teaching a young child 5 or 6 major languages and then letting the child decide later which 2 or 3 they want to keep up, or maybe they want to keep up all of them. But if you don't teach them early enough, it's not an option anymore.
Há 500 anos, ouvir música e interpretar música passaram a ser coisas distintas. Até então, e ao longo da evolução humana, a música era uma atividade em que todos participavam, tão importante como outras funções básicas como andar.
A partir deste divórcio, passou-se a considerar que apenas alguns eram dotados para a música, o que nos leva à questão: gênio e criatividade nascem connosco ou são construídos?
Famílias como a família Bach ou como a família do Mozart, essas famílias tinham educação musical extremamente cedo, de modo que há uma combinação dos dois elementos. Há um elemento muito provavelmente genético, que permite certas condições básicas, e depois há o elemento social educativo, em que a educação musical aparece imediatamente, e as duas coisas combinam-se para criar essas personalidades fora de série.
Music is certainly in our genes, but that's not the end of the story. The way that we develop in any domain, not just music, but in language or art or mathematics or social relations, is a complex interaction between genes and the environment, which includes parenting, and opportunity and culture. The culture we live in makes a big difference.
It's like comparing a slab of stone to a finished sculpture that comes out of it. The process of building the sculpture is the process of using your brain. The brain is like this block of marble that sculpts itself as it gets used.
The brain is a learning machine. It's a neural network. It literally rewires itself after learning every task.
It seems to be true for almost any area of knowledge that 10,000 hours is required to reach world-class expertise. But in domains that we do care about, like playing chess or being a race car driver or a soccer player or a great leader of a country, mathematical skill, music, acting, we don't know of a single example of somebody accomplishing that in less than 10,000 hours.
I'm not a brain expert. I know I was very good at chess. I'm pretty good at a few other things, as analyzing big picture. I have some special skills that made me a good chess player. Working hard is also a talent. I cannot imagine a top chess player, a top football player, a top business person, anyone who is reaching a certain height in his or her career without working hard. Of course, talent is prerequisite. If you don't have a talent, I mean, I'm not good at music, so that's why you don't expect me even spending 10,000 hours getting really good at that. I'm playing piano. But, you know, it's about the right combination of fighting so your topic, your field of activity, and putting a lot of hard work, because otherwise you will not excel.
It doesn't mean that if you put in 10,000 hours, you're guaranteed to be an expert. It doesn't mean that at all. It's just that if you don't put them in the hours, you're guaranteed not to be an expert.
We have an expression in the United States: if you want to play in Carnegie Hall, if you want to have your violin fill the Carnegie Hall, the key is practice, practice, practice. That's the key. But you see, that's also the key to the human brain. Practice, practice, practice.
Treinar intensamente fortalece as ligações entre neurónios e pode mesmo modificar a estrutura do cérebro. Foi o que se verificou com os cérebros dos motoristas de táxi londrinos, cuja massa cinzenta aumentou durante a memorização das 25 mil ruas da cidade, em 4 anos de preparação para o exame.
Aquilo que o cérebro é e aquilo que pode vir a ser depende do uso que dele fazemos, graças à sua capacidade para se adaptar e transformar.
The idea of it taking 10,000 hours more or less to become a world-class expert is related to the intersection of learning and neuroplasticity, the idea that your brain can change itself, and as it learns, new connections are formed, and that is what neuroplasticity is. And neuroplasticity continues throughout the entire life. 80s, 90s, 100 years old, you still have neuroplasticity, but it takes on a different quality. Younger children tend to pick things up faster because the brain is configured to create lots of new connections more rapidly than in older people.
Understanding how your brain works may lead us to treat children differently, for example, because little infant brains are not miniature adult brains. They're brains that are waiting for a set of wiring instructions from the world. And everything that we do with an infant, every word that we speak, every touch that we give, every song that we sing, every shout, the child's brain is recording that information. It's shaping the child's development.
Crianças oriundas de meios pobres têm o córtex cerebral mais fino e um desenvolvimento neural diferente. Uma conclusão inquietante quando se sabe que 1.000 milhões de pessoas vivem em pobreza extrema com menos de $1 por dia e metade da população luta para satisfazer as necessidades básicas.
So I think, for example, if we really took seriously how brains work, we would eradicate childhood poverty. We would just get rid of it. Because the circumstances in which a brain grows determines its potential to some extent. Literally changes the wiring of a brain depending on how much nutrients it gets, how controlled the temperatures are, how much love and kindness. The conditions of poverty, the conditions of neglect, the conditions of adversity, these things actually have an effect on the wiring of an infant's brain that will affect later in life how sick that person will become as an adult, what their capacities will be.
Há uma experiência feita com ratos, que é a experiência de pôr um rato num ambiente pobre e um rato em ambiente rico. Enfim, o ambiente pobre do rato é uma caixa sem mais nada, só aquelas comidas que dá ao rato, e o ambiente rico é uma com rodinhas, com cores, etc., que o rato anda lá a brincar. E verifica-se que o que teve no ambiente pobre tem os neurónios menos desenvolvidos, tem o córtex menos desenvolvido, e que o outro tem o córtex muito desenvolvido. Então, a conclusão que foi é que a estimulação faz crescer o cérebro. É uma conclusão dramática, porque a pergunta imediatamente a seguir, então, onde é que acaba a estimulação? Quando a resposta dessa experiência é a ausência de estimulação não deixa o cérebro crescer. Porque se eu fosse buscar um rato de cano de esgoto, deve ter um cérebro muito melhor do que o do ambiente rico do laboratório. Porque está sujeito a muito mais experiências que são mais úteis.
If any country was very smart, we're in a global economy now, right? Where all the companies are competing against each other and countries are competing against each other. Anyone who solved the problem of childhood poverty would harness the potential of, their biggest resource, which are basically those little human brains which are going to grow up to, innovate and create. So in an innovation economy, your young people are your major resource. So knowing how the brain works, you would do a lot, I think. You could do very well by, eradicating childhood poverty.
É espantoso o salto que a humanidade deu num curto espaço de tempo geológico. Sentimentos e emoções, um cérebro 3 vezes maior, criação de imagens, memória, cooperação, linguagem e um apurado instinto de sobrevivência. Uma tempestade perfeita que levou à condição excepcional dos seres humanos.
Conhecer os mistérios do cérebro é uma corrida de longa distância, cujas respostas nos colocam em melhor posição para responder a algumas grandes questões da humanidade. Em que ponto da trajetória nos encontramos?